This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under 18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 557 for June 17th, 2018. Coming up on today's show, the Wet Coast Confessions of an Anxious Slut. That's coming up on today's show. Hello everyone, this is your host Minx, and I'm very happy to be back behind the microphone bringing you a new episode of Poly Weekly. Okay, it's a little bit late. I'm actually thinking we might need to go bi-weekly in the summer because the sun is out in Seattle and it's really hard to spend 9 hours a day behind a computer and then come home and spend time behind the computer. But I am so excited to bring you this super fun interview with Kat Stark, who recently came out with her book about her first few years of trying polyamory, starting in her mid-40s, and the book is entitled In Pasties, The Wet Coast Confessions of an Anxious Slut. We'll get to her interview in just a few minutes. But first, a few announcements. First of all, thanks to everybody who wrote or called in and told me about the issue with the intro music in episode 555. I apologize to you and to your ears that one segment was massively distorted. Looks like I accidentally hit a button and didn't realize it when I did my run through after the final leveling. But it finally has been fixed. So if you were hesitating to recommend the episode to your friends, now you can, because listening to it will not damage their ears. In slightly more exciting news, you folks know that we are friends of the Swingset crew from the Life on the Swingset blog and podcast. And what you may not know is that every year they do a full takeover of the Desire Resort Riviera Maya in Cancún, Mexico. Now, I've never been. I've heard it's absolutely fantabulous. And I know that Cooper Beckett of the Swingset podcast considers it the greatest place on earth. It's one of those all-inclusive resorts. It has a gorgeous beach, pool and hot tub, 4 restaurants, 3 full bars, and also, of course, space to be yourself. So the Swingset Takeover is the most inclusive and geeky trip that Desire sees all year, with theme nights and educational events and entertainment for straight couples, as well as every letter in the LGBTQIA plus rainbow. So if you are within that rainbow, I really encourage you to join this trip and have some fun with it. The events include things like nude karaoke, foam parties, dungeon disco BDSM night, live podcasting. See, that would be awesome for me. Well, okay, the other ones would too. There are demos of pegging, fisting, and flogging, speed dating, wine and beer tasting, costume theme nights, yum yum, and orgies and gangbangs. Tristan Taramino calls it truly the sex-positive vacation of a lifetime. If it's within your means, I highly encourage you to go to this event. For more information, you can go to ssdesire.com. And I'll provide a link in the show notes at polyweekly.com or in the notes section of whichever podcast app you are using to listen to this podcast. And another exciting announcement, for our polycule anyway, is that we have a big thank you shout out to anyone who has purchased our books, 8 Things I Wish I'd Known About Polyamory Before I Tried It and Fracked It Up, or our No Dick Pics book on optimizing your online dating profile, because your purchases have helped to finance our vacation this fall, which is going to be to Paris. Yes, we're going to Paris. I have not been there in many years. I lived there for a while when I was a student. Totally loved it, been back a few times, but not in the last decade. It will be Elle and Lusty Guy's first time, and I'm so excited to show them the Paris that I have loved ever since I was a high school student, studying French and learning all about the culture and history of France and Paris. And I'm just so excited. So if you know any events that are going on in the last week of September. We're going to be there September 24th through October 3rd. So if you know of anything going on that you think we might enjoy, drop us a line, polyweekly@gmail.com, or better yet, contact lustyguy@polyweekly.com because he does manage our calendar, and let us know what we should go to. And thanks again for all your purchases. Not only does it make me feel like our books were helpful and maybe helped you on your poly journey, but it's also nice that we got this wonderful side benefit of being able to go on this wonderful vacation. So thank you. We are all truly grateful. Next up is our interview with Kat Stark about her midlife experiences with exploring polyamory and gender and anxiety. I am delighted to welcome to our studio Kat Stark. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
First time on the podcast, and we're so happy to have you. There were at least three up to, it could have been as many as half a dozen people who emailed me or messaged me and said, oh my gosh, you have to interview this person, which is kind of unusual. And I think that is, believe me, I believe those pitches from like friends and listeners way more than any PR person. So you must be doing something right.
Oh, well, that's really lovely to hear. I appreciate that.
Yeah, because we hadn't actually met before this. But
no.
Yeah. So give us your sort of quick who you are and what you do.
Sure. I am a blogger and a podcaster and a toy reviewer. And I have been just sort of kicking around the non-monogamy, sex-positive scene for about 3.5 years. I started writing, sort of journaling my experiences when my husband and I opened up our relationship, and not really intending to do anything with it, but it's just sort of how I process, really. And it just sort of became more and more. And then Cooper Beckett and I are pretty good friends, and we had been chatting, and he was like, do you want to post on Life on the Swing Set? And then it just kind of grew from there, and it's just been something that I just was kind of intrigued by, and then now takes up a big chunk of my life.
That happens.
Yeah.
I have to give you props because you've only been doing this for 3.5 years and you've already written a book.
Yes.
I was doing this 10 years before I got off my ass to write a book. That is fantastic.
Oh, yes. Well, thankfully I had people who were like, you should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And I had initially been like, well, I don't really know anything. I've been just messing everything up, and it's all this trial and error.
Yeah.
And they said, this is a voice people need to hear.
That's what makes a great book. Yeah.
Yeah, because people often feel pretty intimidated when they read things about, these really complicated relationships that are going, what appears to be perfectly with all these meetings and all these, discussions and cohabitation and all this. And I'm over here just flailing away. And I've had a lot of people say like, thank you, because I feel less alone. And that's the kind of comment that just makes me feel like what I'm doing is worthwhile.
Right there with you. That is how you warm a podcaster's heart, or at least mine.
Exactly.
Is if you tell me, you help me realize I wasn't the only one, and that not crazy for doing this or for wanting to do this. And that's exactly why I do it. Since I brought it up, let's talk about your book. Let's just, I would say get it out of the way, except I want to keep talking about it. So you've got a new book out, Yelling in Pasties, The Wet Coast Confessions of an Anxious Slut.
Yes.
Tell us about the book. Why'd you decide to write it? What's in it?
It is a compilation and kind of rewrite of a lot of my blogging posts for the first few years. I kind of took everything I had written and then kind of reworked it and figured out how to have it I sort of bounced back and forth about whether trying to tell a really specific narrative or whether to go just kind of chronological through, and ended up with a more chronological organizational style. And it basically tells the story from when my husband and I decided maybe we should have some adventures, to where we're in polyamorous relationships and going to sex parties and hosting them for our 20-year wedding anniversary and that sort of thing. So Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds like a fun 20-year.
It was great. It was really good.
Is this the story of your poly explorations? Is it the story of gender explorations? What all is in here?
It is much more about non-monogamy and about discovering more my sexuality and embracing that. I just turned 45, and up until a few years ago, I just hadn't really explored myself enough. Like my husband and I had good sex and we had fun and I really enjoyed myself, but it was only the last few years when we started this life and I started exploring so many toys and figuring out how my body works and ended up, becoming a squirter. And I was
fun.
What the hell happened here? To now that I have to just cover every surface in a Liberator throw. And yeah, the book tells much more that story. The gender transition I've been feeling a little more recently is very recent, like in the last couple of months. Oh. So I find it kind of interesting looking at the book, and I'm referencing being a woman and she all through it. And I'm having these moments where I'm like, does that actually feel right? And that is another very strange and interesting thing that's been happening at a time that seems much older than this usually happens.
So you started questioning your gender identity in your mid-40s. What is that like? Tell us your experience.
Well, it's definitely a little strange because I had just been so like, no, I'm a cis woman. That just feels right. And I had been, I've always just enjoyed dressing like slightly in male drag and wearing suits and ties and that sort of thing, but just never really thought anything of it. And it was only quite recently where I was starting to feel much more at home in that presentation and thinking like, oh, maybe I'm kind of genderqueer as opposed to just being a woman who likes to wear suits. And yeah, it's more like woman doesn't quite feel natural as opposed to feeling like really strongly like it's wrong, because sometimes I do really feel that, but other times it's just like I'm just not quite that. Like I am that, but also not. And I think there's something to being in your 40s that gives you the confidence to be like, I'm going to try this thing, and if it doesn't work, I can just switch back and it's not really the end of the world. Whereas I think if I'd been doing this in my 20s, it would have been much more angst.
I think we all have more angst in our 20s.
Yes, absolutely.
I think no matter what the decision is.
Yeah, and it just feels like every decision you make feels so huge. And like, if I do this, I can never go back. And I've recently asked people to start using they, them pronouns with me. And I just figure if it stops feeling right, I will say, you know what? I tried that. That wasn't right. Let's go back to she and just move on.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about sort of some discomfort I've had with it, because I sort of feel like, am I betraying women at a time that women are, having, or it's not like we haven't been having a hard time for a very long time, but that it's more open, and the struggle that's going on currently in the culture. And I sort of feel like by not entirely identifying woman, like, am I betraying that in some way?
Is that an internal question, or are there actually people who are pointing fingers at you?
No, I think it's more an internal question. So I guess I can't say I am without angst. And, there's also a piece of the internal that wonders, like, am I just looking for attention? Am I a poser? Am I just, these questions, am I genderqueer enough, that we always tend to have around so many things in our lives?
Since you brought it up, let's circle back to one of the key words in your book title, which is anxious. The Wet Coast Confessions of an Anxious Slut. Does that mean that you are talking about struggles with anxiety or some type of mental illness in your book?
Yeah, for sure. I was diagnosed quite a few years ago with generalized anxiety disorder. And over the past, well, I guess since last November, when I kind of realized it was happening, have been in a fairly severe depressive episode. And then started medicating for the first time in my life with antidepressants. And that has made a big difference for me. So I've come out the other side of the depressive episode, which is awesome. And now mostly just back to my regular anxious state. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge because stress exacerbates anxiety. And non-monogamy has a lot of stress involved. And sometimes it's really great stress because wonderful things are happening, but stress is stress and tends to set off my anxiety a fair bit.
How does your anxiety disorder affect non-monogamy and poly? Because, there's a lot of processing. I'll say it's not always wild disagreements and arguments, but there's a lot of processing.
Yeah, for sure. It's, my husband and I joke, about when we were first non-monogamous and we were just thinking, threesomes and maybe swinging and whatever, because we're like, oh, we're not going to be polyamorous because we just don't want to have to do all that talking. And yeah, now that's really what we do.
All the talking.
Yeah, all the talking. But it's actually improved all the communication in all of our lives. Like it's been kind of amazing how we just talk about everything more. And so that's actually really cool. But I totally got off topic there.
Oh, no worries.
I spend a lot of time in my head, worrying about like what I've said to people and like in communication, and one of the people I've got my main relationship with other than my husband is a long distance relationship. So there's we mostly communicate via text. And so there's a lot of wondering, like, what's the tone behind that? And did I say the wrong thing? And overanalyzing that kind of thing.
How do you handle that? Because if it's long distance, it's hard to get the confirmation that you need.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really tough. And I've often found just being honest about it and saying like, hey, I'm having a really anxious day. Could you just, give me some reassurance that you still like me or something like that? And just asking for it directly, I've found has been one of the most effective ways to get that need met when I'm feeling quite anxious.
Asking for what you want. Crazy idea. Who would have thought that might work? That's just nuts. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say crazy and nuts. It's terrible. Sorry.
And as my sexuality evolved and I realized like how much I liked being a slut, and I had so much anxiety about like, am I doing this wrong? Because everything in the culture had told me that this is not what I'm supposed to be, and this is bad, and I'm loving it. And so
there must be wrong, of course.
Yeah. So there was a lot of, big feelings about, are people going to judge me? And how can I really embrace this? And fighting with all those messages that we'd gotten growing up about sexuality, particularly people socialized as women. It was quite a challenge to be able to just really embrace it and be like, no, this is what I like. And I feel good when I'm in a big pile of bodies. And it's amazing. And I get joy. And this is really healthy.
Do you have any other tips for talking yourself down when, the anxious voices, I call them chattering monkeys.
Okay.
Try to convince you that what you're doing is wrong or stupid or that your partner doesn't like you or anything like that?
I often end up going to CBT exercises. I guess the other CBT, cognitive
the
mental
behavioral
health
therapy,
CBT.
Not cock and ball torture. Yes, clarify.
And going...
I like that, though. I get anxious and I just go torture somebody's cock and balls and I feel better. That could work, too. I like it.
Yeah, if I was more of a sadist, I'm sure that would be amazing. But so I end up sort of walking through a lot of those exercises is like, how much evidence do you have that this person, really loves you and cares for you and thinks you're awesome? And sort of, okay, how much evidence do you have to the contrary? And, going through that kind of thing to just be very like practical and specific about it tends to help me.
Well, that just makes a whole lot of sense. That does not always work for me. Sometimes it is good. I do find it helpful. I should say I don't have, any particularly diagnosed disorder, but there are times certainly when I can't sleep where I kind of work myself up a little bit about things.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes logic works. Sometimes not so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, logic is I often feel two paradoxical things at exactly the same time. And you have your logical brain saying like, this and your emotional like flailing brain saying this entirely other thing, and you're feeling them at like simultaneously. I have a lot of that all the time, and it's really amazing how I can hold like two contrasting points of view at the exact same time and have I'm so glad nobody can see inside my head. Yeah, it's much like feeling jealousy or envy and compersion at the same time. Like, it's like, I'm so happy that you're getting to do this amazing thing, and I feel so good about that, and also like really hate that you're doing it and feel totally crappy and abandoned. That you can have both of those things happening simultaneously. And I think that was a lot of my experience as well, as we've done more and more of the polyamorous side of things, and my husband got involved with a woman here in town, and we were more of a triad for quite a long time, and now we've sort of switched to the V kind of triad, but and she's a dear friend now. But sort of as that piece was developing, especially as she and I were feeling less connected, it has been very strange to see those shifts and to be really happy for him that he has this amazing love, and also just be like, wow, this kind of feels threatening to our big long-term relationship. So.
And remind me again, how long ago did you start practicing non-monogamy?
About 3.5 years.
Okay, so you started blogging and podcasting exactly when you started.
Pretty much,
at the same time. Wow, that's actually pretty smart. I think everybody should, at the very least, start journaling when you go through this journey, so you can look back at your early entries and go and laugh, or
oh, for sure. When I was compiling the book and reading through the earliest entries and thinking, we did that? How did we do that? Like, why did we think that was a good idea?
Oh, so many things I thought was a good idea early on that just weren't. Oh,
no, not at all.
I cringe. Also why I wrote a book, but also I waited 10 years to write mine because...
your book was definitely very helpful for me as I was fracking it all up. So.
Okay. There you go. It's right there in the title. How did your husband respond? Was it your idea to try non-monogamy?
Yeah, I guess it was more me, but he was definitely into it. And we'd had this time in our relationship that we'd had about 6 months of just like really solid connection and really great sex. And we were thinking like, we want to go on some more adventures. And we were just started talking about what that might look like. And I had recently read about a club in downtown Vancouver that had sex parties, and I was like, that is a thing? Like, I had no idea that this was a thing.
Parties are a thing.
Yeah. And, I knew there was the BDSM parties and that sort of thing, but I didn't know there was just like sex in public. And I was just like, okay, I want to do that. Like that thing. I want to go there and have the sex. And really, at that point, that was all I was thinking about, was just, having public sex and just feeding that exhibitionist side of me, but in an appropriate place so that I could be relaxed about it.
Were you an exhibitionist before, or did you know you were an exhibitionist before?
I didn't know I was, but looking back, like I would tend to drink too much and show people my panties at parties or something.
Fun girl!
Yeah, it's just like, and we joked about that I was the kind of drunk person that became a stripper. Like, that was just kind of my thing. And so eventually realized, oh no, that's what that is. Having public sex for the first time and feeling eyes on us, and that was just really great. And then having a threesome with a good friend who, you know, we did the thing that you're totally not supposed to do, which is approach one of your bisexual friends and say, hey, would you want to have a threesome? But thankfully she was into it, and she's like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And so, yeah, that worked out really well, and that friendship and that connection has continued. And I just, for my birthday, just last Saturday, had a babe bang, and had a big group of women and non-binary folks. We just sort of said, no cis men, sorry. And had a big, you know, I got banged by like 7 people, and there was a lovely orgy, and it was just, yeah. So she was part of that. And, you know, we've developed these really close, intimate friendships that are just really quite spectacular.
That sounds absolutely delightful. And I can't believe we've been talking this long already.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, before I forget, we still have a few more minutes. Mm-hmm. So, Yelling in Pasties, The Wet Coast Confessions of an Anxious Slut. Where can we find that?
You can get that at Amazon, either .com or .ca for fellow Canadian folks. Mm-hmm. And it's available in all of the ebook formats and in paperback. It's been going really well, and it's been really fun to have it out there. And I am working on the audiobook, but wow, does that take a lot of time.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I haven't done one. If I could do an audiobook, but then I would not podcast for like 6 months. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wrote a novel in April, doing like one of those like 1 month, you know, power novel write things.
Wow, girl.
I just, no time for working on the audiobook. It's also about non-monogamy. My working title is Waking Up Polly, and it's the sort of the story of a relationship between like 3 people told from their individual sort of rotating points of view.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll look forward to that. You'll have to come back on the show and tell us about that when it's out.
That would be awesome.
Awesome. Kat Stark, thank you so much for joining us. For people who are fascinated by you and now want to do everything about Kat, which is read your blog, listen to your podcast, read your book, where can they find you?
You can find all the info at onthewetcoast.com. And our podcast is on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and all of those kinds of things, also called On the Wet Coast. And I have a blog at lifeontheswingset.com as well. And I use Twitter a lot. I'm taking a little break right now, but I tend to use Twitter a lot, and my handle there is Wet Coast Cat.
Nice. Kat, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a blast.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks again to Kat for taking the time to chat with us. If you didn't get those websites, never fear. They are, of course, in our show notes at polyweekly.com or in the notes section of whichever podcatcher you're listening to this podcast on. It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by Fubbly Polyamorists everywhere. This week's Happy Poly Moment was written in by Lala, who said, I met this guy about 6 weeks ago, and the morning after our first date, I had breakfast with him and his wife. This was my first time actually meeting my metamor, and after some initial nerves, it was wonderful. All of us are relatively new to being in poly relationships, and I feel like I won the jackpot with them in my life. This weekend, they invited me to their home about 2 hours away from where I live. We spent a lovely afternoon at the park watching their daughter play, and I met his parents and some of their friends. Even though we all agreed to introduce me simply as a friend, I so value the trust they placed in me to really become part of their world. Our first night together, his wife also had a date, and we all enjoyed drinks together and then retired to our separate bedrooms. Totally new experience for all of us. During the days, we 3 and their little girl ate together, hung out, chatted, and generally got to know each other. I loved being with them in their home and really getting to see him as more than just my boyfriend and sex partner, and I'm really enjoying becoming her friend. One afternoon, he and I went out on a nice date exploring his city, came home, and the three of us had dinner together, and then she and I went out for drinks and some fun shopping at a sex store before coming home to drinks all together before he and I went to bed. The whole time she was very open about giving us time to be alone and also in bed together without it being awkward or weird, and I was so happy to be able to wake up in the morning next to him and have breakfast with us all together. We all agree it was a success and are looking forward to many more visits of this kind, and we have even floated the idea of doing some traveling together for a long weekend this summer too. Super happy poly moments for sure. Well, I agree, Lala. That sounds absolutely fabulous. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Stacy and Kimberly as new Poly Weekly Playmates. As a reminder, Poly Weekly Playmates are subscribers to the podcast who donate $1.99, $4.99, or $9.99 every month to help keep us going. And we also got a one-time donation from Ulrika, who wrote in and said, "Hi Minx, hi Lusty Guy, listening all the way from Germany. You're my fave Poly podcast, and I always look forward to a new episode. Keep up the awesome work." Well, thank you, Ulrika. We really appreciate it, and thank you for your donation. And as a reminder, we are a free resource. We've helped hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and continued success with polyamory. Your donations help keep the podcast free for everyone both inside and outside the community. But you can contribute in other ways. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, email polyweekly@gmail.com or call the listener comment line at 802-505-POLY. Or if you want to book us to speak at your event or to give a remote class or coaching session, contact lustyguy@polyweekly.com. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/polyweekly, Twitter @polyweekly, and I'm @cunningminx, and everywhere else on the internet. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. And remember, it's not all about the sex.